city banker, a prisoner of war, and a landscape gardener share a home together. They might seem like unlikely roommates to you. No, this isn't a spare room advert. These are all residents that live or have lived in my homeless hostel that I run here in Westminster. I don't think they ever imagined themselves sharing a home together either. Next door to them, a construction worker, an addict, and a father of 3. No, these are not unlikely roommates. They are, in fact, all the same person, all part of a homeless community they never imagined themselves living in. The reasons for homelessness are diverse, as are the backgrounds of the people that make up the homeless community. There are some common themes: bereavement, loss of a loved one, loss of a home, unstable housing, unstable jobs, unstable governments, unstable families. The effects are varied too. People respond to trauma in vastly different ways. I've worked in the sector for 4 years now, not a long time, but not an insignificant amount of time. And I can honestly say that every day that I work the job is different and challenges me to come up with creative solutions to different problems. For those experiencing homelessness, fear and panic are familiar emotions. Fighting a daily battle for survival, faced with uncertainty in hostile environments, faced with broken systems and increasingly scarce resources. Fear is a powerful emotion, but it's also important for survival. It alerts us to danger and it primes our mind and our body for action. It's also quite an unpleasant feeling. I think most of us can relate to acting or not acting in a way to avoid doing something that scares us. Take, for example, a fear of rejection or a fear of embarrassment. Maybe you have a phobia of heights that prevents you from climbing a mountain, or a fear of the ocean that prevents you swimming in the sea. But regular exposure to fear and stress can actually be a good thing. The key part is that you are able to resolve it. Let's say, for example, you've got an impending essay deadline and you've not made a start on it. The fear starts to kick in, you leap into action, you stay up all night to finish the essay, and upon handing it in, you feel much better. The unpleasant feeling has gone away. Maybe next time you start on the essay a little bit earlier. This is called hyperarousal. The stress has kicked your sympathetic nervous system into action, releasing stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And we each have a different amount of stress that we can handle. This is called our window of tolerance. And being exposed to small amounts of stress on a regular basis and being able to resolve them can actually help to broaden our window of tolerance. However, when fear is experienced where you cannot control or reduce the stressor, you're left feeling helpless, stuck in a state of hyperarousal. Homeless people experience trauma throughout their lives, and the repeated exposure to the unresolved stress and trauma has actually begun to shrink their window of tolerance. So they exist in a state of hypervigilance, where their nervous system is dysregulated and they're always on high alert, constantly scanning the room for the next potential threat. The effects of experiencing terrifying fear takes a toll on our mind and our body. It leaves a scar etched on your brain, such that a sound or a smell can take you back to the very moment, leaving your heart racing and your palms sweating. This is what we call a trigger, and they come in all sorts of unexpected forms. The behaviors that people that develop as a result of trauma can seem unpredictable or exaggerated. They might not make a lot of sense to you. For example, I once worked with a man who had a fear of walkie-talkies. This was rooted in having been imprisoned in Yemen and suffering torture at the hands of military and police. As a hostel support worker, I knew a resident that was triggered by someone simply knocking on his bedroom door. For him, this was a reminder of a childhood interrupted by police and social services, with frequent visits to children's homes. Some of these reactions might not make sense to you or seem like an overreaction at first sight. Survival behaviors developed as a result of trauma serve a purpose at the time, but they can be unhelpful to us later in life. Let's take, for example, someone with a childhood trauma of having a neglectful parent that leaves them on their own a lot and doesn't pay them enough attention. They can become clingy and go to extreme lengths to please their caregiver. Later in life, they continue with this behaviour, and whilst in childhood this helped reduce the likelihood of abandonment, as an adult it might lead to them acquiescing to a violent or abusive partner, worried that they could leave them. In this way, behaviour developed to keep you safe ends up holding you back. I've developed some frequent sayings and metaphors over my years of working with vulnerable people. Perhaps one of my most used is when I talk about the need for someone to step outside of their comfort zone. You see, your comfort zone is like a box. You know where the floor is, you know where the sides are, you know what's above you, and you know what goes on inside of it. Outside of the box is the unknown, an uncalculated variable. For homeless people, safety is paramount. Predictability makes you feel safe. So the box feels like safety, even if you might not much like what goes on inside of it. That comfort zone might look like using drugs or alcohol. It could look like codependent relationships with someone that hurts you and treats you badly. It might look like avoiding trusting relationships altogether. If you don't trust or rely on someone, then they can't let you down. So, how do we support people with trauma in a world that contains so much fear for them? It mostly looks like active listening, and it looks like listening in a non-judgmental way, really taking time to listen to what someone has to say and giving up other things that might seem more important at the time. It is a universal truth that we all interpret other people's behaviour through the lens of our own reality and experiences. We think about what would cause us to act that way, or what's a reasonable way to respond. But your reality is not mine, and mine is not yours. We've lived through different things, and we've come from different places. Another example, so I had a previous resident in a hostel that I worked in Camden. He had some serious health needs, a leg ulcer that he wasn't getting treated, that I was worried would lead to a life-threatening infection. He led quite a chaotic life. He wasn't really oriented to time or day, nor did he have a phone. So we were left with trying to catch him for a quick conversation whenever he was in the building to try and offer him some support. However, he would often react to this with anger or with avoidance. So knocking on his bedroom door, perhaps he wouldn't answer, or he'd tell you to go away. He'd dart off if you tried to speak with him in the corridor, and sometimes he could be aggressive and verbally abusive as well. I imagined that he didn't like me, or he didn't want to speak to me. Perhaps he just didn't want my help, even though he was clearly in immense pain. I obtained a phone for him, and when I rang him on that phone, I was surprised to find that he answered. Not only that, but he spoke to me at length, a good 20 minutes of conversation. What I discovered in that conversation was that he did want help, and that his behaviour was due to social anxiety. He found it absolutely terrifying every time I was trying to force an interaction with him face-to-face that he wasn't prepared or expected to have. Over the phone was a much more comfortable method of communication for him, and of course, he could choose whether he wanted to answer or not. I listened, and I gave him back some of the control in the process. This is another key part of trauma-informed practice: empowering people, making decisions with them, not for them. In my experience, nobody changes when they are forced to. They change when they are ready, at their own time and at their own pace. This is probably the most frustrating part of my work. We have to wait until someone is ready to make the changes that they need to change. Sometimes you see their readiness to change before they do, but ultimately, if they've not got to that chapter of their book yet, then you have to wait in the wings, offering words of encouragement and praise until they're ready to turn the page. This example is of a homeless woman I know. I count her as a friend, actually. She's not one of my residents. In fact, she's part of my community where I live in South London. Over 2 years of encountering her outside the tube station, I got to know her story. She lived in an electrical cupboard on a council estate with a much older male partner. He had experienced homelessness before. She wanted to get to a hostel. Him, not so much. Perhaps he had bad experiences of hostels in the past, or perhaps he knew that they might be separated when the time came for them to be housed. He would often find ways to sabotage her attempts to get housing. Their relationship was a complex one. When he had a flat, he'd rescued her from a traumatic situation and provided her with refuge. She felt very attached to him. His prior experience of homelessness meant he was street smart and resourceful. But at times there was violence in their relationship, and he could be cruel and abusive towards her. I frequently made street-link referrals for her. I directed her to day centres. I bought her mobile phones, and I hounded the local outreach teams to go and help her. She knew where the day centre was, and at times she had access to a phone and the numbers to call for help. But still, almost 2 years later, she remained out on the streets. One day, she came back to the electrical cupboard, and she found her partner there with some other homeless men, and they were all using drugs. They were cruel to her, they were nasty to her, they made horrible jokes. She just wanted to go back to sleep after a day of begging, but suddenly her safe space didn't feel safe anymore, and neither did her safe person. I saw her that night, and I knew there was a window of opportunity. I made some calls and I sent some emails. This time, when the outreach teams called and went looking for her, she answered and was there to meet them. She went to the day centre unattended. She went to the assessments, and 1 week later, she had a hostel in a women's service in Vauxhall. She needed to step away from her comfort zone and trust someone to help her where others had let her down. She needed to step away from a relationship that had kept her safe and was familiar, that was now causing her harm. I have many examples of situations like these, and they give me the ultimate thrill in my work. When someone decides to leave their comfort zone, embrace their fears, and step into the unknown, but this time in a direction of their choosing, taking a leap of faith. So I encourage you to do things that scare you. Write the essay, climb the mountain, maybe give a TED talk. You might just enjoy it. Thank you for listening.